Hi guys, I'm Willem from Pam Golding Properties. I've been in property since 2012. Welcome back. This time we're talking about rentals with Helen from Faurie Nell. They are attorneys that I've used on occasion over the years and have been really reliable and informative. So I thought I'd get Helen in to help us out with some of the rental questions. I'm a purely sales agent, but I do have clients who are landlords or currently tenants or whatever the case may be, and do have some rental questions. So I thought this might be, a useful avenue to kind of get that information out there quickly. And as I said, Helen is with Faurie Nell. She's a director, attorney, notary, and conveyancer. Introduce yourself, Helen, if you'd like.
Hi, Willem. I'm a director at Faurie Nell. I'm a conveyancer, by no means an expert in evictions or rentals for that matter, but the law is pretty much very straightforward at this particular point in time. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure.
Happy to assist.
Thanks for your time. We'll shoot through really quick. We've got 4 questions today. Some of them have, sort of segmented parts within them. I'll put timestamps for each question when I edit this. So the first question will be, what happens if a lease ends and a new one is due to begin during lockdown? A, if an old tenant is still in place. B, if it's an empty unit. Question 2 will be if a tenant gets retrenched or something similar during this time and can no longer afford the current rental amount. What do they do in that situation? If they're currently in the property, if they've signed a lease but not yet moved in, what happens with the lease and that particular deposit? So that's from both ends, both the tenant and the landlord's perspective. Question 3 will be, can you be evicted, and can you evict a tenant during lockdown? And question 4, from a sales context, but slightly related, is if a property is transferring and occupational rent was meant to take place during this time, but couldn't because of lockdown, and the buyer cannot actually physically take occupation, what are the options for both parties? So those are the questions that we're going to shoot through, just those 4. Any questions, any extra questions, people can comment or send me a message or an email or whatever the case may be, and we can see if we can get those answered for you. So we can start with the first one, Helena. What happens if a lease ends and a new one is due to begin during the lockdown?
So, Willem, the regulations are quite clear under level 5 as well as level 4 is that you are to stay put. You are not allowed to leave your house without a permit, and you can only for now get a permit to go to work if you are considered an essential service, or if you go to hospital for medical advice or requirements. You don't need a permit for that, but you need to obviously be able to prove that you are going to the hospital or for doctor's purposes. You are only allowed to leave your house if you go and buy essential goods. So you are very much not allowed to move house. Under level 5 as well as level 4, which will start tomorrow on the 1st of May. So there, for that reason, moving of house is completely out of the question and is not allowed. This means that any current tenants in a property, even if the lease expires, they are not allowed to move out of the property. New tenants are not allowed to move into the property. There's a lot of managing agents and complexes that issued internal letters and circulars to the homeowners and to their residents, which clearly states as well, with regards to the lockdown regulations, they will not allow any moving companies to go in and out. For that matter, you will also not see any of the listed essential services as being moving companies. So they're not allowed to go and operate as a removal company. Current tenants, therefore, has to stay put. So the lease will be extended on a month-to-month basis. That can be done verbally or that can be done in writing, preferably in writing, specifically if there's any additional conditions to be put into this new extension. New tenants will not be able to move into the property. If the property is vacant, obviously the property will remain vacant until a tenant can move into the property. So the lease agreement for that matter will be placed on hold until such time as the new tenant can move into the property, and from there onwards it will kick off.
Okay, great. So then for that empty unit scenario, can a landlord enforce that lease even though the tenant can't technically take occupation?
The landlord cannot enforce the lease because there is legislation that prohibits moving.
Okay.
So it comes down to impossibility of performance. Where that is the case, where it's impossible for a party to perform, there's various scenarios where it can contribute towards impossibility. One being a legislative requirement that has not been foreseen. In this case, it's a very good example in terms of the regulations that was passed. So, for example, the lease was entered into before lockdown. Subsequently, after that, legislation was passed, which prevents people from leaving their house, in essence, also preventing people from moving. That piece of legislation, in terms of the National Disaster Management Act, prevents people from moving house. So that puts the entire lease agreement on a hold. It means that the tenant cannot move into the property. It's impossible for the tenant to move in. And by virtue of the impossibility, the counter obligation which the landlord has in terms of providing occupation can also not be met. He's not allowed or able to provide occupation to the tenant to move in. And for that matter, he cannot claim rental for the months that the property is vacant. So basically, the tenant cannot move in because it's impossible for him to move in due to legislation. And for that reason, it is also the landlord cannot enforce his rights and obligations to collect rental.
Okay, perfect. And I think question one is a perfect segue into question two, speaking on that impossibility bit. So question two is, if a tenant gets retrenched or something similar during this time and can no longer afford the rental amount, what happens to the lease and to the deposit? So this is for two scenarios as well. If they're currently within the property, so an ongoing lease, so they're in month 6 out of a year, and if they had signed a lease prior to moving in and were thinking about moving in but couldn't actually move in because of the current lockdown, what happens in that situation?
Okay, so the first situation is, let's say, where the tenant's already in the property. Subsequently, after lockdown, they got retrenched or the salary got reduced and can no longer afford the rent. The lease is still very much in place. So there is no such thing. And I know there was a lot of fake news doing the rounds where apparently the health minister said that you don't have to pay rent. This was confirmed to be fake news. There was no such declaration from the government. You are still liable to pay your rent regardless of your financial situation. So in this case, the best would be to come to an agreement with the landlord to either reduce the rent for a specific period or to then pay off the reduction of the rent that they didn't pay for some reason or the other, either retrenchment or a reduction of income, that they pay off what they can't afford to pay now at some particular point in time. So coming to an agreement with the landlord is first place and the first price to do. So it's best and it is advisable for all tenants as well as landlords to, in the event that a tenant cannot pay, come to an alternative agreement in writing and enforce that agreement then as such. Where tenants just blatantly refuse to pay for whatever reason, be that financial circumstances or just plain ignorance, the landlord still very much has the right to enforce the terms of the lease agreement. It's important for landlords in such event where there's a default to secure their rights by sending out letters of demand to the tenants. That's now in specific instances where they have not come to a different agreement with regards to the rental. Sending out a letter of demand secure the landlord's rights to either evict or collect the rental going into the future. For now, no evictions are allowed. So even if you do get an eviction order for some reason, if you can prove urgency, which you probably won't be able to prove at this particular point, that eviction order cannot be served at this point in time. The regulations clearly does state that there is a limitation in terms of evictions. and there is a provision on the sheriff to service any eviction orders at this particular point. You can still, any landlord can still collect outstanding rental money into the future as well. So the lockdown itself and the situation for the tenant does not exempt any tenant from paying due rental. So very much the lease agreement remains in place. The situation where a tenant has signed a lease agreement, not moved in, and subsequently lost their job is a bit different, because remember we said the lease agreement is on hold for now, can't be enforced. So the fact that that tenant perhaps paid a deposit doesn't necessarily mean that the landlord can now retain the deposit as damages. The landlord cannot claim damages where the lease agreement is on hold. This is my opinion personally with regard to these. You also need to have a look at what your lease agreement says, why a deposit is being paid. Because you get different reasons for payment of the deposit. Most cases, the deposit is paid to secure damages to the property when the tenant moves out, or to secure non-payment of essential services such as water and electricity. These deposits are not really paid to secure rent in the event of non-payment. So it may be difficult for a landlord to argue that he is retaining the deposit of the tenant still to move in because of the lockdown and the financial situation of the tenant that day. He also it's not advisable for the landlord to enforce that lease agreement onto a tenant that he knows will not be able to pay. Because if he knows the status of the tenant in terms of finances, it would be kind of stupid for him to enforce a tenant into his property that he knows will not be able to afford the property going forward.
Yeah. Okay. So, but just to be clear though, being retrenched or any sort of financial situation, that does not constitute impossibility.
No, it doesn't. Not in this case, no. Impossibility of performance is a very tricky law legislation, not really legislation, but they call it a doctrine. There's various aspects to have a look at before you can call on impossibility of performance. Being retrenched in itself, not necessarily would be impossibility of performance at the end of it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so straight on to question 3, and I think we kind of touched on it already, but just to go through it again, can you be evicted or can you evict a tenant during the lockdown?
So as we say, the current regulations does have a clear indication that no evictions are allowed. In the event that you do have an eviction order that you already obtained, you can't enforce that at this particular point in time as well. You can, however, in the future, once lockdown is completely over, you can get an eviction order. It doesn't necessarily mean because your tenant hasn't paid during lockdown that he will be exempt from being evicted because of his failure to pay. That's why it's also important to put a letter of demand forward to your tenant in the event that they do not pay at this particular point in time, and in the event that there's no alternative agreement between the landlord and the tenant, so that the landlord can enforce his rights in the near future without a doubt, and to make sure that his rights are secured now so that he can enforce and start enforcing it when he's able to do that after lockdown.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, on to the last question. So this was the one that was in the sales context. If a property is transferring and occupational rental is meant to take effect now during this lockdown period, but can't, obviously, and the buyer can't physically take occupation, what are the options for both parties?
Again, as we said, no moving house is allowed. So that also relates to where properties are being sold. So even if there was an occupation date in the sale agreement, which was passed and the parties cannot move because that occupation date falls within the lockdown period, it's unenforceable in both events. So the buyer can't force occupation of the property, seller can't force occupational rent to be paid because that specific term of the agreement cannot be done at this stage. yeah, that's pretty much it. Regulations still the same with regards to moving house, whether or not you rent or sell.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I don't know if you had anything you'd want to add, or anything that people should know.
Yeah, from a conveyancing point of view, what we are currently saying to clients, if you want that sort of security in terms of being able to plan your move, specifically where it relates to occupation in terms of sale agreements, we are advising the clients at the stage to enter into an addendum where they sign an addendum to say that occupation will happen within, for example, 10 days after lockdown is over or after regulations comes into effect that will allow moving of house. So when that will be, if it will fall under level 3 or level 2, we don't know, time will tell. But that sort of addendum at least puts a little bit of planning perspective into someone's day when they know a lockdown for a specific course will end tomorrow, and we can then plan our move 10 days from tomorrow.
Okay.
The best option they have at this stage.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Perfect. Yeah, thanks for your time, Helen. And yeah, as usual, if anyone has any questions, please leave your comments and all of that, and we'll try and get Helen back on. I know there's some other big topics that people want to discuss. Deeds office is a big one. I think let's wait and see, where we are with that in the future. But yeah, thanks for your time and all the info. And yeah, have a good lockdown period going forward.
Thanks, Willem. Hope to see you soon in real life, though.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks.
Definitely. Thanks.
Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.